us.
I'm so
Their
sorry,
beauty.
folks.
So let me do this again. I want to just
Do it
say
again.
this piece, which I think is important for all of us, for all of the First Nations that we are learning about, that their stories continue to teach us all that the land, the air, water around us, their beauty, their ferocity, and their capacity to be abundant are inseparable from our well-being as individuals and community. And we're grateful for those lessons. So this is the first of 2 webinars where we'll dig into the potential for the use of the National Pollutant Release Inventory, which is the NPRI. And throughout this session, I suspect that's what you're going to hear us talk about, is the NPRI. As we've thought about today, we felt it was safest to assume that most of you did not know it well, if at all, but I would like you to check that out. And in the chat, let us know by giving us a 1, which is where I know the NPR well, 2, I know a little bit about it, and 3, I know nothing about the NPRI. And Dolores and Corey, I think, are going to just monitor that as we go along. But all of our presenters know it very well. They know it as a powerful tool, and we hope that this next hour will help you become familiar with it and to learn your way around it a bit. We hope it'll spark ideas about how you can use it in your group and in your community. We're going to do another session in the next couple of months, and we plan to start with a rather shocking piece that fracking and other fossil fuel industries are not included in the NPRI's scope. Our question for that session will be, how do we create the needed pressure for the government to require fossil fuel industries to report their emissions? So Dolores, do you want to just check to be sure everybody's settled and announcements?
Well, I think everybody's settled okay. I'm not seeing any problems so far.
Good.
I think there's about 35 people here now, and we're really happy that registration took a sudden boost up at the end, and I'm not too sure whether Sela put something out or what, but there we are. We'd love to know where you're from and your organizations, if you're connected to anybody, any other groups, and let me see. If you have technical problems, Corey Sandler is here to help us. And just put something in the chat to Corey or admin, and she'll try and help you deal with it. What else? The big issue is to put your questions in the question and answer box at the bottom, because then at the end of all of our presentations, we're going to go through the questions and try and pull them together. I'm seeing that there's not too many, a lot of people are saying they don't know a lot about the NPRI, so that's good because that's why we're here. I think that might be about all I have to say for the housekeeping.
Okay, that's great. So we're going to begin. We have 3 remarkable people with us this afternoon, and some others who have been helping us prepare this session. But the 3 people who are going to be speaking this afternoon come with many years of experience of as environmental activists. We're going to begin by welcoming John Jackson. John is going to introduce us. He has a job of introducing us to the NPRI. And there are few people more qualified to do this. He's been heavily involved in the public input into the NPRI for the last 30 years. He was an environmental group representative when it was being designed in 1991, and ever since has been part of its advisory multi-stakeholder work group. So over the past 40 years, John has worked with citizens groups on a wide range of environmental problems, including waste issues, radioactive waste, water quality. Much of his work is in the Great Lakes Basin, where he's a member of the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Quality Board. So John is joining us from Kitchener, iced in, snowed in this morning, Ontario. So John, please welcome and please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Alice. And if you want to start the slides, Dolores, that'd be great. And you can skip past the first one. Can you put them on full? Okay, thanks. You can skip past that one. I was just introduced.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'm really pleased to be here, and I really want to thank Dolores and Alice for pulling this together. It's really important to be reaching out. I want to show you where this got a big boost that led to us having the Npri, the United States having the TRI, and it's the Bhopal disaster in India. And this is one night, overnight, 1984, when a pesticides company there owned by Union Carbide had a release of isocyanate in the middle of the night. 2,000 people were dead by the next morning, and within 2 weeks, 8,000 were dead. But the deaths were only the beginning of the problem. Many more died prematurely, and at least 500,000 people have suffered long lifetime respiratory problems until the day they die. What's really interesting in looking at this is that beyond, I mean, it's just a horrific disaster. But what was really astonishing about it is that the doctors come trying to take care of all these people who are in desperate straits, and they couldn't find out what was in the release. They couldn't find out what the substance was that they had to deal with, and therefore didn't know how to treat the people. And when you look at the Time magazine cover here, it says the night of death, that was Bhopal. But note underneath, it says a global worry. And it really did escalate what had already been a community right-to-know movement that was developing, especially in North America. And it really was a thing of not just accidents and what are we at risk of in terms of accidents, but what are we confronted by daily? We don't know what was in the factories, for example, living next door to us, that we are being exposed to substances daily. So it was a big push for these right-to-know inventories. So as we can go to the next slide now, thanks. So that's why the United States, soon after that, developed the Toxic Release Inventory. And in Canada, we developed the National Pollutant Release Inventory. As was said in the intro, this was developed actually by a stakeholder group, but the Minister of the Environment, to his credit at the time, said, I'm going to have a National Pollutant Release Inventory a year from now. It will be implemented and in place. Do not spend your time here discussing whether we should have it, just discuss how to do it. It was an effective way to make something happen. So Npri reports on the releases from individual facilities, and it's not just companies, it's their public sector facilities as well. Releases to the air, to the water, to the land. The releases that are transferred to other facilities, the transfer of waste, for example, to other facilities, and to including recycling facilities, off-site recycling facilities, and to go into treatment and then back to disposal. So you can get some double counting in this, which you have to watch for. Let's go to the next one now. The next slide. Okay, thanks. The inventory is based on and is provided for in CEPA, in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. What's so important about that means it is by law, and therefore people are required by law to make the reports. They can be taken to court if they don't, and that has happened. And they have never won the court case when they tried to not abide by what Npri had told them to do. Critical. The other thing about it is that it's an inventory of the release and transfer mandate under CEPA, and it's a yearly reporting. We get reports, every 5 years perhaps, and it's hard to know what's going on with that. It's every year, and it's by specific facility and by specific substance. Let's go to the next one now. Here you can see that it's facilities all across the country. And this is the data from 2019, but you can see 8,500 facilities across the country that had to report and reported. But it was really significant. No surprise, there's Alberta with a huge number of them. Southern part are in BC, a lot. Southern Ontario, no surprise, up to Montreal, a lot of the substances. But it's everywhere. Look up in the far north. There's sites up there as well that are releasing, every day and as part of their operations, and that have to report. So this is important, not just to people in heavily populated areas, but throughout, because that's where the facilities are. Okay, the next slide, please. The substances there's a wide range of substances. There are about 320 substances that they have to report on. That has expanded over the time, very much as a result of the pressure from the stakeholder group, which I've been on, which Dave is on, and which Anna was on at one point, and which Anna is on, who we've all been in there pushing to get it expanded with success, wanting more success, obviously, also. And it's a range of type of facilities, as I said. The pollutants are ones that wouldn't surprise you, carcinogens, reproductive issues, endocrine disruptors, air contaminants that affect breathing, etc. So a wide range of types of substances, and also from a range of types of facilities, as I said. Municipalities have to report on their wastewater treatment plants. They may not have created the pollutant in the first place, but it gets discharged into the sewer, ends up in their facility, and they have to report on what leaves their plant, either in sludge going to the land or into the water, into the stream, flowing downstream. So, and incinerators, municipal waste incinerators, for example, have to report, as do all other incinerators as well. So it's really an important range of types of substances. Let's go to the next slide now. Here, Gran gives you a sense of how it breaks down in terms of the amount of tons. Again, I'm using 2019 data here. This is material that I was lucky enough to have Faye pull together. And about substantial, millions of tons there in total. But you can see that the releases to air, to water, to land, the percentages, how they work out there, again, substantial in all sectors. And it really can see importantly that the transfers part is also a very important part. And we don't have a very good handle on where they're transferred to. And that's something we have to work on to make sure that Npri gets better at. The next slide. So the next slide is that Npri is far from perfect. And that's why we work so hard at trying to get improvements made to it all the time. It doesn't report on all the potential harmful pollutants. Just to give you an indication, there are 23 substances on Canada's domestic substance list. We have 320 that are reporting. It doesn't mean all of those should be brought onto the system necessarily, but it does mean that we have to keep expanding the numbers. It doesn't cover pollutants that are pesticide applications only. The problem we run into with the Npri is that other departments, other branches of the federal government are jealous, and they say, well, we take care of the pesticides problem adequately. We get enough reporting on the pesticides situation, and therefore fight against having it put in here. We ran into a similar situation when we tried to get greenhouse gases included in the reporting, and basically ended up, another part of the department saying, well, no, we take care of that just fine. And we've had a similar fight on getting radionuclides reported, with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission saying we're perfect regulators and have perfect knowledge and perfect websites. But the reality is that it's, so that's some of its major problems. Other problems is that there are thresholds. Under, if you manufacture less than a certain amount, you don't have to report. Or if your release is less than a certain amount, you don't have to report. And therefore, a lot of facilities end up not having to report because they're smaller. Luckily, we've gotten some of the substances changed. Dioxins and furans are an example, where it doesn't matter how small your release is, you have to report. And you don't get the same exemptions in terms of small facilities that other places do. And that's the issue around small facilities, dry cleaners and gas stations. A lot of toxics being released from those, but a lot of them get exempted because there's a 10 employee threshold. And a lot of small operations don't have to deal with that. And that was why I also had to make a change in incinerators, because a lot of those don't have a lot of employees, but have a lot of emissions. Let's go to the next page of emissions, of limitations. It doesn't include mobile sources, and that's by the nature of it, can't. These are stationary buildings, plants, the discharge from plants. So cars, trucks, construction aren't covered. And it's one of the complaints industry usually makes, because they say, it's made to look like we're the only source of pollution. What about all the people that drive your cars and trucks? You're responsible too. As with forest fires and those sorts of things that are not there. It doesn't provide good information on what does it mean for people. What does it mean that people living nearby are being exposed to? And that's a challenge to sort out. And we've been working to try to get the site improved and to have more connections made to the realities. But, we can go to the next slide, please, my last slide. It is still an incredibly important tool, and we must not underestimate. We need to be aware of the limitations, but we must not underestimate it, because it does something that no other source does for us. It's facility-specific data. It's not a combination of facilities. It's not a whole sector's data, although on the website you can figure out the whole websites, the whole sectors. But each facility individually has to report, and they have to report individually on each pollutant. So that's a level of detail you really can't get elsewhere. Also, it is data for the release during an entire year. It's not just, they go in one day and test it. They may do estimates the rest of the year, but they have to say over the year, this is what we estimate that we released of that toxic. And that gives you a real sense of what you're being exposed to over a year. And it includes all releases operating. It doesn't matter if they're hitting regulations or not, they have to report. So they come back and say, yeah, well, it's a legal release. It's still a pollutant. And I appreciate that Npri still calls it a pollutant. They have to report all of it. And again, every year reporting is so critically important. The next one is you may have mixed feelings on. The data is provided by the polluter. Now, it's always a challenge pushing to make sure it's accurate and so on. But where it's an advantage to us, is that they can't come to us, as the industry always does, and said, well, you've got the wrong numbers. You don't know. And all we have to say is, well, you must have put in the wrong numbers then. It's your data. And of course, there's also legal issues if they put in the wrong numbers. So it is important to us that they are the ones that reported and are responsible for those numbers. And to repeat that it's required by law. It's not something they debate over. It's not something they say, oh, I don't have to do this. They are required to do it. And most critically, that the data is available to the public. And there is an Npri website where you can go and do searches. It's ups and downs in terms of challenges and successes, but it's there. So we critically need this Npri system, and we need more people using it. And that's what the other speakers are going to tell us about, is how to use it, because I fear that if we don't have enough pressure coming from the public that of saying, yes, we use this. This is valuable. This is important. It makes the task for us who are trying to improve the system more difficult, because people say, well, do they really care? We know you care, but you need to have more awareness of it. So thank you, Dolores. And the last slide was just my name repeated, but anyway.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I don't know about everybody else, but I have a lot more questions now than I did at the beginning. But I want to remind everybody to put their questions in the Q&A, which is probably at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to try and answer some of them after all the presentations are over. Our next presentation is a short video that was prepared for us by Eleanor Hutcherson, and it shows somebody actually going into the website and looking up some information. So John's given us what's supposed to be there, and this video is going to show us what is there. So, and how to find it. The Npri has actually changed its layout a bit since this video was made 2 weeks ago, but they are constantly updating that website. However, the main panels and screens are even the same color. They're just in slightly different positions. So you can just look around and see this. Okay. Come on. Here we go, I think. And go.
Hello. Today we are going to use the National Pollutant Release Inventory website to find out information about pollution in Houston, British Columbia. And what we're looking for is the Npri inventory dashboard. Okay, so we're at the dashboard now, and we have a few ways we're able to go in. Now, because we're interested today in the pollution information in Houston, British Columbia, we're going to select the second option here to drill into data by location, sector, substance. Okay, and it asks how we want to start filtering the data. Let's again select location. And we're going to select British Columbia. And we'll select Houston. And it brings up a map here for us of Houston, British Columbia. And if we scroll down below that, we're able to make choices about the type of releases, disposals, and transfers, or we can narrow things down by the part of the substance list. And this also includes visual information and graphs, as well as tables which are interactive. And if we scroll below, here we can select a specific facility if we want to zero in on just that. And that not only changes the information that we're viewing in the tables, you'll see tables much smaller now that we've zeroed in on a specific location, but we're also seeing a graph that just reflects that location. And if we select, in this case, VOCs, we'll see information now specific to VOCs. So this gives us a tool to get some basic information about pollutants in an area in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. That shows just how powerful this tool can be. At least I'm totally amazed at the level of information you can get. And now, Alice.
Yeah. So that, certainly was the first time I've actually watched somebody, go looking for what might be there. And it gives me a little bit of a sense of what the screen can do. And so I'm both Eleanor and John, you've given us, I think, thank you very much, a kind of beginning of an overview. Now I'd like to welcome Anna Tillman. And she's going to just give us a little bit of an overview of the many ways that community groups have used the NPRI. You know what, it's as hard to do a short introduction for Anna as it was for John, because she has a really long and deep experience with environmental organizations. She's a researcher, writer, activist, has been an intervener, and participant in the process of making all of this. She's a strong advocate of the public's right to know, and has represented non-governmental groups in both Canada's NPRI, the North American Pollutant Release and Transfer Program as well. Over the last decade, she's focused her attention on the nuclear chain in Canada and has intervened in the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's hearings. Watershed Sentinel readers will have seen some of her work in the series in the magazine called On the Yellow Cake Trail. She currently represents the Watershed Sentinel Education Society on the NPRI working group. She's joining us from Aurora, again, frozen in, I understand, in Ontario. So Anna, welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We're just going to share screen. So, 1 second.
There you are. You're up.
Okay. Sorry, just a little bit of technical. So this is what we're looking at here through the presentation I give, the community's right to know, which is the public use of data, and that is crucial. So what pollutants are in a community, doing this is what we're going to go through. So these are examples of what some organizations and individuals have done. So for example, in Sarnia, which is known to have some pretty toxic chemicals, EcoJustice, an organization, did an investigation of these chemicals and the cumulative air pollution as a result. Other areas, the World Wildlife Fund did a national assessment on Canada's freshwater, reports there. Other organizations such as the Environmental Defence and Canadian Environmental Law Association, they had looked at both Canada's data under the NPRI and the US Toxic Release Inventory data to get a view of the Great Lakes and assess changes over time. Other organizations have produced reports. Here's the one from World Wildlife Fund on watershed reports and Partners in Pollution from Pollution Watch, an assessment of Canadian and US contributions. And Great Lakes is such an important aspect here. So it has gotten attention. Whether the attention has served improvements might be another question. Other examples, this is the famous Ambassador Bridge, and the Citizens Environmental Alliance did an expose, if you like, of pollutants using the NPRI. Now that was Canada's side. Year after year, they got it publicized in the newspapers and created a bit of a yahoo. The sad thing was the US it was not involved in this. And of course it shared waters, but it's another example of the robustness of certain organizations to get the word out on what's going on in their areas. There's other uses of NPRI data, a few of them dealing with health and dealing with social status. For example, EcoJustice, look at the Amjuaning, if I pronounce it wrong, is the effect of health and pollution in their area. And this again is the Sarnia kind of area. Pollution Watch, another organization, looked at pollution and poverty in the city of Toronto. And this recently, at a recent meetings that were held in Montreal that John and I and Faye were at, there were examples, University of Toronto grad students, I believe, looking at these various aspects, health issues, poverty, and this goes on in other areas in Canada. So this is a strong use of Npri data. Other groups like Canadian Environmental Law Association has also used the data for a variety of purposes to assess the effectiveness of government's program. And according to, as CELA has indicated, our Environmental Protection Act isn't working. We've seen increases in reported quantities. Now, this is older data between 2006 and 2012, where you've got lead going up, arsenic going up, cadmium. This is incredible, 900%. Mercury, based on fish advisories, has also been increasing in that period, and I'll have something more to say on that. Now, this is something that I find very useful, as John showed another example of a map. This is specific on mercury, releases, disposals, transfers. And as John indicated, you can see, look across Canada from left to right, going from south to north. You can see mercury in based on, if you look at the industrial sectors, just about everywhere, with concentrations in various areas. So this is very important. I work on mercury issues and try to follow them a lot. So this is very useful to dig in. Now, this one here, pulp and paper pollution, I did the study for the organization Reach for Unbleached Foundation that people in BC might be more familiar with. And based on this, looked at pulp and paper pollution throughout Canada. So it wasn't just BC. And of course, looking at the toxic substances, the substances declared toxics, the metals, air contaminants, dioxins and furans, etc. And it was a remarkable way of finding just how much crap, was coming out of the pulp and paper industry. And this is a shuttered pulp and paper plant. As we know, pulp and paper industry has decreased considerably. So this is meant to give you an overview of how citizens, organizations, and individuals have used Npri. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Looking at all of those, I actually want to open them all up and look at them and find out just exactly what they've done with it. And it's actually, knowing of some of those reports, it's, I'm beginning to understand how important the Npri has been in order to make, to help them make their case. So now we want to introduce you to Dave Stevens. And Dave is going to take us into how his group in Smithers gathers and uses information about air pollutants. He's the president of Choked About Our Health, which he calls a kitchen table enviro group in Smithers. They're cranky about local utterly needless air pollution. With his friends, he spent 20 odd years in court and wrangling regulatory processes, trying to make a difference. His background in chemical engineering and computer science has set him up to be a self-described computer-based geezer activist, which is my favorite thing. Dave is joining us from Smithers. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Alice. I'm going to share my screen now. I have some slides for you, and I think I'll talk over the slides. So here we go, share screen. Which screen do I want? Here we are. Okay, can you see that okay? So, Choked is a little organization, as Alice pointed out, and we are participants in a larger umbrella organization called the Airshed Management Society. If it should happen that you want to talk to me again after this presentation, don't email me, okay? geek@uniserve.com. I want to talk about what the Npri can do for a small community group concerned about air pollution. These are local and regional issues, and we take the point of view that that's what matters to our members, and it's what matters to us. Here we go. The defining geographic feature of the Bulkley Valley, where I live, is Hudson Bay Mountain. 8,000 feet, whatever that is in meters, Twin Peaks, Glacier, Ski Hill. It's a big piece of rock. You see it here on a cold, sunny winter morning, a beautiful sight. It doesn't always look that good. This brown band across the slab of rock is industrial smoke. Around here, that's almost always forestry some way or another. And that's what it is here. This collection of fires is logging debris, known generically as slash, piled and burned. So I've been told that in this particular instance, there were perhaps 50 to 100 slash piles in this area, all being burned at the same time. The smoke rises to the top of the mixing layer, drifts off screen to the north, and generates the obscured view of the mountain we saw on the last slide. And while I'm on this slide, I want to thank Sir Vass Mess, who the photographer who captured this and gave it to us. It was a nice piece of work, but it's only lucky visual record. We don't have anything better. These burns are not recorded, not reported anywhere. 10 years ago, with strong support from the province and other people, we participated in a series of consultations over our plan area, which I'll show you shortly, with the public at large, with industry, with healthcare providers, with municipal governments, anyone who wanted to walk through the door. It was professionally facilitated and recorded. And we put together, well, the facilitator put together 120 pages of concerns, goals, and details about what people want to see in our area in order to achieve clean air. That has been our handbook ever since 2012. We still haven't by any means exhausted it. It's mandatory in talking about clean air, have a picture of a belching smokestack. So here we are. This is an antique pollution engine called a Beehive Burner. This one is in Houston, BC, coincidentally. Thanks very much, Eleanor. We're gone now, by the way. But the question, of course, was what's in that plume? It's wet fuel, steam, particles, and what? We don't know. As a small organization, we have no access to the information. The firm certainly is not going to divulge to us. They won't even return our phone calls. And so where can we go with that? As it happens, the Npri is what I would call a perfect partner. It tilts the playing field a little in our direction and allows us to punch above our weight. We get to do the activism, the lobbying, the letter writing, and the bumper stickers, and the Npri does the heavy lifting. So there are some shortcomings that were already pointed out in the Npri, thresholds and facilities in particular, that make it not as applicable in our area as we would like, where people are really concerned about really specific local effects. The overview is great, but we decided to avoid some of the limits on the Npri data. We could get a head start on our own micro emissions inventory using Npri data as a foundation and go on from there. We were very lucky and very satisfied to find our principal investigator, Dr. Judy Krzyzanowski. We scoped out our concerns and got underway. This is the plan area. For those of you who don't know, it would be more or less halfway between Prince George in the middle of BC and Prince Rupert at the coast. This red line you see along here is Highway 16, the Yellowhead Highway. Starts in Brandon, ends in the Pacific Ocean. So we're near the Pacific that way. And thanks to Morgan Height for the map. In setting out to conduct this inventory of our own, we wanted to not necessarily use the facility definition and thresholds. They work in the context for which the Npri is working now. They didn't work as well for us. You can see our other concerns, the continuity of the data record for many years back was very useful to us, essential. And we wanted high quality data. There was no point in doing it otherwise. We had a good discussion at the beginning of the exercise of the characteristics of high quality data that were outlined by Scott Vaughan. He was at that time the Commissioner for Sustainable Development and the Environment, and he talked in his annual report to Parliament about the characteristics of good data. I'm pretty sure Anna Tillman had a lot of input into that, so thanks, Anna. We were able to carry that forward nicely, or our investigator did. And after many difficulties, we have this phase 4 final report. This is the text part of the conclusion of our micro emissions inventory. All the documents and photos in this presentation, by the way, are freely available. Just email me, including this report. And if you want to, this is 60 or 80 pages of summary, analysis, and recommendations from Dr. Krzyzanowski. And it is not an easy read. You need to be quite interested, and it helps to have some background to read this. But that's what we wanted. We wanted a good, solid, factual, scientific report, and we got it. One of our donors, however, insisted that they wanted to see an outcome which would be in plain language, so that a person without special background could read it. So we had help. We approached the Glasswaters Foundation, who gave us some lovely money, and then hired a husband and wife team of graphic designer and engineer who could look at the technicalities in this report knowledgeably and put together a nice small brochure. And I'll show you the front cover, or I think I will. Or what do I need to do? There we are. And you can see my non-facility concern again on the cover. And that came to a conclusion in, it says printed November 2021, but it was December by the time we had it in our hands. This is printed on glossy, high quality paper. It's beautifully laid out inside. It's clear, simple, effective language with good graphics and bright colors. It's really approachable from that point of view, just what we wanted. So I have perhaps 150 of those left. And if people want one, email me, geek@uniserve.com and provide a postal address. I'll send one off in the mail to you. It was our purpose to get the word out there. And some of this will be applicable to other places. It's intended to be for people in this area, but plagiarize it will. It's published under an open source permissive license. So
Wonderful.
I thought when we had this in hand that it would be the end of our documentary record of the micro emissions inventory. Not quite. It turned out there was an option to get wider distribution with very little effort. And so our favorite environmental periodical, the Watershed Sentinel, kicked in at this point. And here we are. 1,000 words for me, publication graphics, and so on and so forth from Dolores and the crew at the Watershed Sentinel. It's a 2-page article. If you want to read the rest, you can go to watershedsentinel.ca and subscribe. That's what I recommend.
Excellent.
If you can take a look a little more closely at that right-hand column at the top, there's a key question that we've been looking at. With this in hand, what next? For one thing, we waited for 11 years after the province did its last emissions inventory in this area. And it turns out that waiting doesn't get you anywhere. So we did it ourselves. The article talks about that. And now that we have it, shouldn't we keep it up to date? Should we do dispersion modeling to see where it gets us? We're building out a purple air network, which I can't really talk about in any detail at the moment, in order to get base level ambient results that we can compare to our modeling when we get that far. Thank you. And in conclusion, I have 2 slides for you about motivation and goal. This is personal, and a lot of people will share these, I think. Here are 3 of my motivators. Little guys are off to school in September, backpacks, lunches, notebooks, steroid inhalers, diagnosed as asthmatic as babies. Asthma is not a common pediatric concern, but it's been a great concern of mine throughout their lives. They're now healthy teenagers. Thank you. And we are working very consciously toward a goal we all share of having healthy mothers, healthy babies, and healthy families.
Mm, mm, mm.
Over to you, Alice.
Thank you, Dave. That's kind of perfect. from the strong lifting, the heavy lifting that the NPR can do, that small groups can't do, to your use of, people who like Judy, who's on with us, who can actually do some of the number crunching and take a technical document and actually turn it into something that is readable and accessible to everybody. And the kids are perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to everyone. We're going to open now to questions and hopefully some answers. I want to say that on with us, we have several other people who are who know this whole area very well. So along with John and Anna and Dave, Faye de Leon is from the Canadian Environmental Law. And as I just said, Judy, the person who worked with the group, and Dave and Smithers is also on with us. So we have a fair background, people who know about the use of the NPRI. So Dolores, have you got a couple of questions that you'd like us to start with? Have you been looking at this? We can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, there are a few questions. I think we'll have time to answer a few more. So go ahead and put them in, because if you don't, I will. The first question, which is quite urgent and gets into a big kettle of fish, so to speak, is, are releases from fish farms counted in the NPRI? John, do you want to take that?
Sure. They're not, unfortunately. It's obviously a terrible situation. And part of it is that the substances that are being released are probably not much of that is what's actually now required to be reported under NPRI. And the other is to look at the definitions of facility. In my mind, a fish farm should be a facility. It doesn't look like a standard facility in many ways, but it should be a facility. But I think it is something that's worth exploring, because there are real issues with it, but it's the type of pollutants that we have to look at very carefully. And it doesn't mean that the pollutants from those fish farms aren't really serious. They are. It's just that the ones that NPRI is listing are not those.
Mm-hmm. What's the process of, of adding? Maybe you could just give us a little hint.
Well, you've got people on the phone and so on here, and on this call, and others, who are on the advisory committee. And it really is the push of the advisory committee. You can make an official petition, but it's really the push. I have to tell you a bias that is very clear in the system, and that is that industry says, well, as long as we recover 80% of the releases, the 80% rule, as they call it. Dave's heard this, I'm sure. Anna's heard this. The 80% rule, that means we've covered enough of the pollutant. So if we're getting 80% of the mercury reported, that's good enough. And we always say, wait a minute, this is the community right to know. Therefore, for communities, we need to know small sources as well. They're just as important to those communities. Yeah. But there's a tendency to keep forgetting that word community, because when the government is using the data to help set policies or programs or whatever, again, they're also taking sort of that bigger picture view of it. But we have to be there pushing, as this is a community right to know thing. We have to say it over and over and over. Yeah. And we have to say that 80% thing is not a rule. And that's why we keep pushing for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was going to add to what John was saying. because so many people are concerned about health issues in their communities. They go around and say, you know, and they live near a place like in Toronto, downtown, some of the areas there where there is lead pollution and so on. So having this tool is of assistance if people know that the tool is there. And I think this is the one thing that we would very much like to do, is make this information more available to the public. So it's not hidden in some kind of fancy system that makes it difficult for people to search, because that's the issue. We've seen lead poisoning in Toronto and other places, and mercury poisoning. So just to add to what John was saying.
If I can add, in terms of West Coast, an organization you might contact to help you on this is EcoJustice. Their headquarters is out there. And I'll give you an example how we got a major change in the NPRI. We've been pushing for years that mining is required to report, but not what they put into their tailings ponds, which is horrendous toxics, or what's in the rock, the stored rock. And we couldn't succeed. Finally, we took them to court. We sued the minister, and with the help of EcoJustice helping us on the legal case, Mining Watch Canada and Great Lakes United, which I was with at that point, and we won the case. And the minister, they never argued it after that. The minister just immediately went and made the changes. So I think it'd be worth you talking with EcoJustice if there are some types of facilities, some types of things not. Certainly the Toronto office was the one that did that in there, but at headquarters I know is on the West Coast. They'll know the fish items and the other items on the West Coast better. It'd be worth checking in with them.
Okay, I've got, there's a very big question here. So let's do the quick and easy one first, and then we'll get to, oh, there's so many big questions. But anyway, this one asks, is there an automatic transfer of substances designated as SEPA toxic onto the Npri pollutant list? How were the 320 plus substances selected? And are there overarching policy goals that the Npri is supposed to be working toward, i.e. pollutant emission reduction targets? And then the second question comes right into that one. We'll do them at once. Could you please describe again how SEPA, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and Npri, the National Pollutant Release Inventory, are related?
Faye is here, who works with the Canadian Environmental Law Association. She always says immediately so that she's not a lawyer, but she is a paralegal, and she does a lot of work on these legal things. So Faye, do you want to speak to the SEPA? She's working on SEPA constantly. You there, Faye? Have you got the mute still on?
I am. So
Great.
I'm going to have to be led to the questions. But overall, John, you could answer the question regarding how the chemicals original list came up.
The question that we were starting with was the relationship to SEPA.
Yes. Okay. So Npri, of course, as John had mentioned, is a mandatory obligation under SEPA for reporting on pollutants. That was mandated as of the 1999 Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And as John mentioned, it is, annual submission of data is required from facilities that meet the reporting requirements. So that in itself, as John mentioned, if you don't report and you meet those reporting requirements, you face the possibility of a fine, right? And with respects to the connection between Npri and SEPA when it comes to pollutants, is that one of the questions? Yes, I think there's a process within the Npri working group process by which nominations are provided. That's one option. The other option is under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, there's a program called the Chemicals Management Plan, in which case, chemicals that have been identified for risk assessments will go through a risk assessment with some designation, whether they meet the designation of being SEPA toxic or not. In the cases where there are chemicals that meet the criteria to be considered SEPA toxic, the government either chooses or doesn't choose to propose the addition of those chemicals onto Npri. It is a process. It requires substantial discussion from a technical perspective, and certainly following and comparing to the criteria that's set out for reporting under Npri. So it still does require that vetting out through the Npri program to be able to add chemicals. The other evolution that people should be aware of is I think we started off with 260 pollutants about at the beginning in 1993, and then we're up to 320. But there has been some development because of the chemicals management program under SEPA, that there's been proposals also to delete substances from pollutants, but the justification of that is not always well grounded in removing those chemicals. So we want to make sure that we strengthen the program and not dilute it without having the ability to challenge how they delete those chemicals from the list for reporting.
I just want to add something too in terms of reporting. Some of the provinces and territories have systems of reporting on toxic substances too, like Ontario has one. I don't know, sorry for my ignorance, if British Columbia has a program of that nature. So it would be interesting to, because you can then put emphasis on some of the particular kind of toxins that are of concern in your area. So yeah, so if British Columbia doesn't, I don't know if anybody else does, but I know Ontario does. And it's worth noting. The other thing is when we have meetings with what used to be what is the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, we're looking at inventories in North America, Mexico, US, and Canada, and doing some comparisons there in terms of what is being covered, what are the what is going on across the continent. So there are other inventories available. Sorry, just to add to that.
So Dolores, I just, we have a couple of minutes left in our scheduled time. Have you got one burning question? I have a burning question, but I can.
Well, I do have a burning question.
Good.
John, you talked about how tailings ponds were eventually added to the Npri. What about fracking fluid ponds and
exactly right.
the oil sands tailing ponds and all of that?
Thank you, Dolores. We've been pushing to having fracking added. It was at first reduced, not reduced. They refused to proceed. We've just been discussing the work plan for the next 3 years, and we're getting the opportunity to discuss adding fracking again, because it really is insane to not have that. I mean, the toxics involved are horrendous. And it's just, it's insane, but we're keeping pushing. But what we are going to do, and what's really essential for all of you who are here, is that support from the community is essential in getting those changes. Yes, some of us on this stakeholder committee, but with other people coming forward said, I want this, it's essential to us. And so what we will be doing this year, and hopefully people will be able to get in touch with through you, is to say, look, here's a proposal that we've heard from you. This is something we're pushing for. Now's the time for you to send in the letter. Now's the time for you to send in the petition. Now's the time, and also to get your input as we're looking at some options to see which options will suit your needs and which don't. So one of our objectives is to really start having our connection to the groups out there who use or could use the system.
Okay.
I want to say that was the perfect segue into our next webinar. Thank you very much. Because that's exactly where we're hoping we can go. The network that's put this together, has coalesced over this last year or so around fracking, and we've done several webinars around fracking, and we know there's considerable interest in that. And so I think our next webinar will begin to try to focus on exactly that question. And again, as we're closing, I just want to thank again the Glasswater Foundation for its ongoing support for this emphasis, for this direction. And to acknowledge that the Watershed Sentinel Education Society has been part of it. So thank you, and thanks to you all. Dolores, do you want to finalize?
Well, I just when I listened to these presentations, I was really blown away at the expertise and the skill of my colleagues. It's quite amazing, and it's really heartening. And unfortunately, I think we all have a lot more work to do, but together we can handle it. And I think we've introduced a few people to the NPRI. I'll say that I'm going to get all of these materials and the recording up on our website at watershedsentinel.ca so that you can go back and look at it again, because I know the video went very quickly and so did all the other presentations actually, but that way we can start to have an ongoing discussion about NPRI and what's going on with oil and gas.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
So thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you again, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank